Russia has recently declared its right to use nuclear weapons if its territory comes under attack. Meanwhile, two major Russian gas pipelines were intentionally destroyed and tensions are ratcheting up. In the event of a World War-scale clash, here are 5 tips to survive World War III. Tip number 1. Leave your city behind. In World War II, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, taking out a large portion of the US Navy, propelling the US into war. A first strike from Russia would likely involve an intercontinental missile aimed at a strategic target. Whether or not the Russians would go full nuclear in this first strike is hard to say, considering the immediate reprisal which would follow from the US. The question then is, what will be struck and how large will the detonation be? A doomsday scenario would involve massive nuclear strikes on the US's most influential cities economically and politically, simultaneously occurring over New York City, Washington, D.C., and Los Angeles. Other targets could include the US's largest military bases such as Fort Bragg in North Carolina, Fort Campbell in Kentucky, and Fort Hood in Texas. Russia's largest known nuke in history was the Tsar Bomba, which created a test blast of 50 megatons, but in actual use could yield 100 megatons. That would be 3,000 times the blast of the bombs dropped over Japan in World War II. A 100 megaton blast would level an area of 20.3 miles from the blast site, so if you know it's coming, get as far away from cities and military bases as possible. Number 2. Get underground. If Russian nukes are going to rain down over the US and you can't get away from likely targets like cities or military bases, try to shield yourself from the blast and radiation. If you receive a possible nuclear strike alert, get underground immediately. The more thick and dense the material you can put between yourself and the blast, the more you'll be protected from not only the shock wave but also the radiation, which cannot easily penetrate thick concrete. Underground subway platforms or tunnels or the basements of buildings are a safer bet. Stay away from entrances which could quickly fill with radioactive dust and debris. You can eat foods that were inside prior to the blast, but avoid getting any materials in your eyes or mouth that were exposed to the nuclear fallout. Any people or pets that survive being outside need to be thoroughly cleaned with soap and water to remove the radioactive material. If you're in a subway tunnel, you can try walking the underground tunnel network until you are far enough away from the blast site to surface and look for help. If not, stay put and wait for help. Number 3. Escape and hide. In the unlikely event of a land invasion by a foreign army, it may be tempting to try and stand and defend yourself. Unless you are a member of a highly trained fighting force, this would likely be a very bad idea, ending in either death or worse, being captured. If you get captured, you'll likely be forced to tell where your friends and family are hiding. Better to run and use your knowledge of the area to evade your potential captors. Use back roads, trails, subway tunnels, any unlikely route necessary to avoid direct confrontation. 2,240 years ago in 218 BC, Roman historian Titus Livius reported, quote, "Phantom ships had been seen gleaming in the sky." In 76 BC, Pliny the Elder spoke of a spark that fell from a star and grew as it descended until it appeared to be the size of the moon. It then ascended back up to the heavens and was transformed into a light. In 74 BC, Plutarch wrote of a battle about to take place between the Romans, led by Lucullus, and a Persian army led by Mithridates VI, when, quote, "all of a sudden the sky burst asunder, and a huge flame-like body was seen to fall between the two armies. In shape it was most like a wine jar, and in color like molten silver." The Navajo people Constant research being conducted on the ranch, many different people have come and gone, but for some, the strangeness seems to go with them. Many have reported an unexplained sickness which overtakes them while on the ranch. Others report having some of the most intense and real lucid dreams of their lives, including encounters with otherworldly beings. A common occurrence for visitors is what's known as the hitchhiker effect, in which some of the strange occurrences continue after leaving the ranch. Dr. Travis Taylor, one of the head researchers on the ranch, has reported his car starting and stopping on its own. Meanwhile, above his house, a large vortex had formed in the clouds. The researchers have also documented data from recording devices mysteriously deleting itself. In 1996, businessman and paranormal aficionado Robert Bigelow purchased Skinwalker Ranch from the Sherman family and dedicated the property to funding scientists to study the strange happenings. While conducting research in 1997, biochemist Colm Kelleher experienced an encounter with a creature which remains unexplained. One night, Kelleher, Terry, the previous owner, and a physicist colleague were startled when the ranch dogs started freaking out and barking. The three men hopped in a truck with a spotlight and headed toward an area where the cows were huddled in a corner. They noticed in the distance a silhouette under a large tree of a cow separated from the herd. When they got closer, the truck's headlights picked up two large orbs of yellow light staring at the cow from a distant tree. It appeared to be a large creature perched on a branch. Out of fear of it mangling the cow, Terry fired shots and allegedly struck the creature. But when the men got to the tree, nothing remained except a few footprints of what looked like a huge predatory bird or raptor. They searched for hours with no further sign of the creature being discovered, but a strong chemical smell permeated the area. Terry Sherman was on his ranch with some family when on the hill line he saw a very large wolf trotting towards them. He held a rifle which offered some assurance, but beyond this, Sherman and his family members report being in a kind of trance at the sight of the creature. As it got closer, he noticed it was no ordinary wolf, but massive, 3 times the size of a normal wolf. It seemed to be calm and non-threatening until one of the calves in the pen stuck its head through the fence. In an instant, the massive wolf had the entire calf's head in its mouth, trying to yank it through the fence. Terry snapped out of his trance and fired several shots, but the bullets seemed to have no impact. Eventually, it gave up and trotted away, but Terry and his son tracked it into some woods. They followed the tracks to a point at which they just seemingly stopped, as if the wolf either disappeared or floated away. After just 2 years on the property, the Shermans sold the land, but continued ranching it as hired hands. Decades, a 512-acre plot of land in Utah known as Skinwalker Ranch has been host to countless bizarre and unexplained phenomena, including UFO sightings, dog monsters, cattle mutilations, and spirits that seem to follow visitors home. Does the property sit above a secret government experimental lab? Did something horrific happen here long before the arrival of Europeans that cursed the land? Or was the area once home to skinwalkers, evil witches the Navajo people claim possessed the ability to shapeshift into different animals to torment people? In 1994, cattle ranchers Terry and Gwen Sherman moved onto the property with their teenage son and 10-year-old daughter. They claim right away there were oddities such as deadbolts on both the inside and outside of the house windows, as well as a clause in the real estate contract stipulating there was to be no digging on the property without first notifying the previous owners. The family had several experiences of flying lights that seemed to follow them wherever they went. One night, Terry Sherman was in his fields with the family dogs when he heard male voices speaking a language he didn't recognize coming from what seemed like 25 feet over his head. However, no machine sounds could be heard. Sometime later, the Shermans began discovering dead bodies of their cattle, grotesquely mutilated with surgical precision. One had a hole cut in the center of its left eyeball, another had a 6-inch hole where flesh was removed from the rectum. You ever see things that make no sense by rational explanation? Have you ever sensed the presence of someone or something that you couldn't see? It's easy to debunk these stories with a rationalist worldview, but it's worth listening and leaving open the possibility that experiencers are telling the truth exactly as they experienced it. Perhaps all sorts of things happen just hidden out of reach of the senses, and perhaps sometimes some people make contact with the inexplicable. Tănăsu exorcism is a case which took place in 2005 in Romania. An Orthodox nun who was considered mentally ill by most was declared possessed by a young priest who said, quote, "You can't take the devil out of people with pills." The priest, with the help of a few other nuns, tied the woman to a cross and kept her like that for several days, reciting holy scriptures and anointing her with holy oil. A towel was forced into her mouth to keep her from cursing. After 3 days, she was declared cured and was given bread and tea, but after eating she fainted. In the ambulance, the nun was given 6 doses of adrenaline to wake her, but by the time the hospital was reached, she had died. Was this a true demonic possession? Or in this case, was a mentally ill woman abused by church officials until being overwhelmed, leading to her death? According to the Yale-trained psychiatrist and exorcism priest Richard Gallagher, there are a few signs that distinguish a mental illness from a demonic possession, or a less intense version known as oppressions. He says, quote, "A possessed individual may suddenly, in a type of trance, voice statements of astonishing venom and contempt for religion, while understanding and speaking various foreign languages previously unknown to them. The subject might also exhibit enormous amounts of strength or the extraordinary rare phenomenon of levitation. I have not witnessed the levitation myself, but half a dozen people I work with vow that they've seen it in the course of their exorcisms. He or she might demonstrate hidden knowledge of all sorts of things, like how a stranger's loved ones died, what secret sins she has committed, even where people are at a given moment." The 1973 film The Exorcist is based on events which took place in the late 1940s to a 14-year-old boy, Ronald Edwin Hunkler, recorded with the pseudonym Roland Doe. The boy was introduced to a Ouija board by his aunt, who was a spiritualist. After the aunt's death, strange things began occurring around the boy, such as scratching noises from his mattress, furniture moving on its own, and objects levitating. Allegedly during an exorcism at Georgetown University Hospital, the boy managed to snap off a bed spring from under the mattress and slash the priest's arm. From the family home, the boy would undergo 20 exorcisms over the course of a month. There were up to 48 witnesses who claimed the boy spoke in a deep voice and spouted Latin phrases he couldn't have known, and also that he vomited so much that the priest was forced to wear a raincoat while 10 people held the boy down. Several hours into these intense events, the boy stabilized and seemed to wake up from his trance, saying that, quote, "He's gone." In 2011, a woman named Latoya Amons, her mother, and children moved into a house at 3860 Carolina Street in Gary, Indiana. According to Amons, almost immediately, strange events began to occur. Swarms of large black flies covered the windows and walls of the front porch. Heavy footsteps could be heard pacing around empty rooms and soon would be accompanied by a shadowy male figure. Amons claimed to feel invisible hands choking her from time to time. During a sleepover, Amon's 12-year-old daughter was seen levitating above the bed and didn't come down until the family gathered and prayed loudly. The son was seemingly thrown across the room and would act possessed. A doctor who was called to the house labeled the behavior delusional and contacted Child Protective Services, who concluded the children were merely performing for attention. However, someone from their office claimed to witness one of the children walk up a wall backwards. In April of 2012, Father Michael Maginot was summoned to attempt to exorcise the property and claimed the house might be a portal to hell itself. After 3 attempted exorcisms, the family moved away, and in 2016 the house was leveled. Demonic possessions have plagued society since ancient times, from Babylonian priests casting demonic sculptures into fires to the Hindu Vedas making reference to asuras, supernatural beings that sabotage and torment humans. The ancient Greeks referenced demon-like creatures interfering with human affairs, and today the number of Catholic priests being trained in the practice of exorcism is on the rise, along with the demand for their services. The following are accounts made by people alleging direct experience with such demons. Tip Number 4. Stockpile foods. One aspect of modern warfare on the population would include cyber attacks which cripple our ability to make transactions, access our money, buy goods, or even communicate. Imagine a world with no internet. The food on the shelves would quickly be bought up by cash holders, and with an electrical grid attack, much of the frozen and refrigerated goods would go bad. Whether because of natural disasters or supply chain disruptions, it's good practice to keep an extra stock of canned and dry goods just in case. Also, probably a good idea to keep the fact of your food supply a secret from most people. With enough time, hunger can turn a reasonable person into something very dangerous.